Have you ever imagined what would happen if three of the most destructive forces in all of Middle-earth had followed the same path? Sauron, the Dark Lord, the Balrog, the King of the Underworld, and Smaug, the Golden Dragon. Three names that, alone, were enough to destroy kingdoms, divide peoples, and mark entire eras with fire, shadow, and fear. But there is a hidden truth in the ancient folds of this story, a revelation that few have known, and that has always been there waiting to be perceived. Because what truly prevented these monsters from uniting was not distance nor chance, but something much deeper. Something that, had it been different, would have extinguished any possibility of victory for elves, men, or dwarves. Imagine the impact. The Balrog abandoning Moria, Smaug flying over human cities, and Sauron orchestrating everything with surgical precision. No wall could withstand it. No army could survive. It's almost impossible not to wonder what would have happened if this forbidden alliance had actually been formed. And it is precisely this journey, full of hidden decisions, dark mindsets, and buried secrets, that we will now unravel together. Before we delve any deeper, do the following. Comment below. Where are you watching from and what time is it there now? It's always amazing to see how far this community goes in real-life Middle-earth. And if this kind of story makes sense to you, if you like exploring those epic behind-the-scenes stories that most people gloss over, then subscribe to the channel and leave a like to support this type of content. There's a video over here that perfectly complements this topic. Click and stay with me there. The nights at the end of the Third Age seemed heavy, with something no one could name, as if the air held a secret too ancient to be understood by the people of Middle-earth. The stars, once so clear, twinkled behind a veil of unease, and even the wind seemed to carry a distant murmur, as if the mountains repeated stories that should never be heard. Men, elves, and dwarves walked with tense shoulders, attentive to every sound, realizing that the darkness had changed texture. It was not merely the absence of light, but the presence of something approaching. It was a feeling that seeped into their thoughts, a kind of silent omen that altered the mindset of even the bravest, as if the world were on the verge of an inevitable transformation. In the heart of human cities, warriors trained tirelessly, not by order, but by instinct. Mothers closed the windows early, fearing what they could not see. In elven halls, even the wisest admitted they sensed an unusual disturbance, something that seemed to walk among the trees, observing each glimmer of hope as if choosing the exact moment to extinguish it. Meanwhile, the dwarves, buried in their stone fortresses, felt small tremors beneath their feet, vibrations so faint they could be mistaken for the mountain's breath, but which, in truth, carried the memory of an ancient terror. Everything was quieter than usual, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence that precedes great decisions, revelations, and catastrophes. A perfect setting for any sensitive mind to grasp what the eyes couldn't see. Evil was stirring, not as a single organized force, but as fragments of the same shadow that, scattered, still managed to have enough impact to shake even elven hearts. It was as if the world was about to relive stories that many had tried to forget, and the choices of the present seemed to carry the weight of entire eras. The hidden truth is that Middle-earth never suffered only from the name everyone knew, Sauron. The real danger always lurked behind the scenes, hidden among deep caverns, reigning in forgotten mountains, waiting in valleys where no traveler dared to enter. The advancing darkness did not depend on a single lord, and this realization made the threat even greater. It was like watching a war chessboard where the dark pieces moved on their own, driven by different pasts, ancient ambitions, and forces that went beyond any mortal army. And yet, however much everyone sensed the approaching danger, no one imagined how vast it was. While free peoples sought answers, Evil exploited the openings, spreading fear, insecurity, and doubt. 3 weapons as powerful as any blade. It was this combination that made the moment so critical, as if each small event were part of something larger about to emerge. It wasn't just a physical threat, but a psychological blow that tested convictions, transformed perceptions, and put the very essence of hope at stake. The invisible fear that hung over Mittelerde had no defined form, but it possessed purpose. It moved along the edges of human thought, fueled rumors, transformed whispers into prophecies, and created a sense of urgency impossible to ignore. Even those who were part of the nobility, accustomed to power and the security of impenetrable fortresses, felt vulnerable before what was approaching. It was as if the whole world was breathing faster, preparing for an event that could change everything. And it was precisely when everyone believed they understood the threat that a crucial detail began to emerge. Evil, though silent, is never truly alone. Even fragmented, it creates invisible bonds, intertwines in the shadows, and strengthens itself in shared darkness. The pieces of this great shadow had been moving for longer than anyone imagined. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. From the first rumors about the movement of darkness, there was a feeling difficult to explain, as if 3 presences, each with its own history and ambition, breathed from the other side of the veil that separated the visible world from the forgotten world. And when we observe this journey through a deeper lens, we realize that Mittelerde was never threatened by just one centralized enemy, but by 3 ancient shadows that walked their own way, carrying in their hearts the weight of lost eras. They were not ordinary creatures. They were primordial, almost mythological forces, each with an impact capable of reshaping entire countries. And yet, however powerful they were, they remained divided by nature, pride, and willpower. The first of these was the Balrog, the scourge of Durin, a being so ancient that its name existed before many peoples built their kingdoms. A primordial spirit shaped by fire, wrath, and obedience to chaos, destined from the roots of the world to be an instrument of destruction. When it slept beneath the depths of Moria, its repose resembled the slow beating of a sleeping heart, yet capable at any instant of turning mountains to ashes. For the Dwarves, it was not merely a creature, it was the living reminder that, however much they sought riches, there were limits that not even strength or ancestral stubbornness should surpass. The Balrog did not serve. It reigned. It was the personification of an immutable mentality, not to share power, not to follow orders, not to accept chains. Its throne was not made of gold, but of silence, darkness, and fear. Meanwhile, in the north, another force lay, as destructive as it was refined. Smaug, the Golden Dread, the last great dragon of his line, was different from the Balrog in essence, but equally dangerous. He was driven by greed, sharp intelligence, ambition, and pride. He not only destroyed, he relished the psychological impact of every move. Every venomous word, every flame upon a city that dared to defy him. Smaug sought no followers, troops, or alliances. His kingdom was solitary, built of ashes, bones, and countless gold coins, piled up as monuments to his own superiority. In his mind, everything and everyone was inferior. Perhaps that is why he never showed any real interest in a master. After all, for him, even fear itself had an owner, and that owner was himself. And then there was Sauron, the Lord of the Rings. Unlike the other shadows, he ruled not through rage or greed, but through strategic logic, through a profound understanding of how to manipulate hearts, break wills, and build empires upon the illusion of control. Sauron was pure transformation, not only in the physical form he lost and rebuilt throughout the ages, but in his ability to mold reality around his intentions. His goals were vast, calculated and meticulously aligned with a single purpose: absolute dominion. While Balrog and Smaug remained entrenched in their territories, Sauron gazed at the entire map of Middle-earth, assessing every weakness, every opportunity, every decision that could tip the scales in his favor. He didn't want to share the world with anyone. He wanted to redesign it. And when we observe these three giants in the same light, we realize something crucial. There was no possible combination between them. None of them was born to serve. None of them would accept sharing power. The Balrog existed to destroy, not to negotiate. Smaug existed to accumulate, not to obey. And Sauron existed to rule, not to share. It is precisely this hidden truth that makes the story so fascinating. Evil is not a solid block. It is a fragmented storm full of colliding egos, incompatible ambitions, and shadows that prefer to devour each other rather than share the same kingdom. This dynamic shaped much of the decision-making and behind-the-scenes dealings of the great wars of Middle-earth. It is no exaggeration to say that if these three had shown even a minimum of cooperation, the fate of the free peoples would have been irreversible. But the shadow that frightens the most is also the shadow that least accepts company. And while Sauron manipulated armies, the Balrog dominated the depths, and Smaug set kingdoms ablaze. None of them ever considered the possibility of bowing to the other. And this, paradoxically, preserved the last spark of hope in Middle-earth. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. When we speak of the great dark forces that shaped Middle-earth, we almost always think directly of Sauron, as if he were the starting point of all the evil that spread across Middle-earth. But this perception is only the surface of a much deeper and more complex story. There is a hidden truth that is rarely spoken clearly. Before Sauron dreamed of becoming lord of anything, there already existed Melkor, Morgoth, the first great enemy, the most powerful of the Ainur, the root of all corruption that still echoes through the ages like a poison that has never lost its strength. And understanding his legacy is understanding why evil never managed to be fully united, not even when circumstances seemed to push all dark creatures towards the same purpose. Melkor not only commanded legions, he shaped minds, he created monsters, distorted spirits, influenced wills, and planted seeds that would flourish in darkness long after his fall. Orcs, dragons, demonic wolves, Balrogs, each corrupted people retained a part of his impact, as if his essence was scattered in living fragments, maintaining his influence even when his body no longer existed in the world. He did not build an ordinary army. He fabricated a lineage of creatures driven by deep, often contradictory desires, but all linked by the same origin: rebellion against the order created by the Valar. And it is precisely in this detail that the key point of this journey lies. When Melkor was finally defeated at the end of the First Age, his army did not disappear, it fragmented. Evil was not destroyed, it merely spread, and this scattering carried an inevitable consequence: discord. Just as a kingdom without a king is divided among rival lords, the dark forces began to act according to their own logic, fueled by the pride, greed, and thirst for power that Morgoth himself had awakened within them. The Balrogs, once loyal generals, retreated into deep caverns to reign as isolated entities. They sought neither leadership nor servitude. They sought only to maintain dominion over the shadows where they hid. Dragons, shaped by greed and destruction, spread across the north, surviving as living symbols of devastation, guided by the same fiery personality that Melkor exalted. The orcs, scattered like a plague, multiplied without central direction, but always inclined to conflict, like distorted echoes of the violence he fueled. Even Sauron, the most loyal of his lieutenants, carried within him the mark of this heritage. He inherited not only power, He also inherited the tendency toward absolute domination, manipulation, and the unwavering certainty that every creature should bow before him. And this same mentality, so similar to Morgoth's, made it impossible for beings like Smaug or the Balrog to accept any kind of true alliance. Each of them was, in a way, a fragment of the first enemy's arrogance. How could one unite forces born to rival each other? Melkor's legacy was not a lineage of servants, but a lineage of tyrants. Every creature he corrupted carried within itself a reflection of the same flame that led to his ruin, the refusal to share power. This is the revelation that explains why evil, despite being so threatening, never managed to form a definitive coalition. It wasn't merely a lack of communication or strategy, it was a matter of essence. Pride was the gravitational center that drove away, rather than united, the shadows. And this fragmentation has a direct impact on history. If Melkor had been completely destroyed, perhaps evil would have disappeared with him. But because his creations remained alive, his ideas remained alive as well. The world was condemned to confront creatures that carried within them not only the physical force of darkness, but also the competitive mentality that would prevent any lasting union between them. Each battle of the future was, in fact, the distant echo of the first war fought at the beginning of time. And so, when we observe Middle-earth from the perspective of this legacy, we understand that Sauron did not arise from nothing. He emerged from the cracks, left by an even more terrible master. And creatures like the Balrog and Smaug were not merely isolated monsters, they were remnant chapters of a story that was never fully concluded. Each represented a different style of destruction, but all shared the same root. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. From the earliest times, when the mountains still held memories of primordial fire, there existed a creature the people of Middle-earth should never have encountered again. The Balrog of Moria was not merely a sleeping monster, but a living fragment of forgotten wars, a pulsating reminder of the chaos of the First Age. While many believed all such creatures had been destroyed in Morgoth's defeat, the hidden truth was quite different. Some fled, crawling through the shadows and descending so deep into the world that not even starlight could reach them. And among these survivors, one plunged deeper than all others, the scourge that would one day destroy the heart of the Dwarven kingdom. Balrog did not hide out of cowardice, but out of strategy. He retreated to the depths of the Nibelgebirge, like one who carefully chooses the field where he will reign for centuries. There, enveloped by stone, darkness, and absolute silence, he became part of the mountain. He slept like a dormant volcano, the intensity of the fire trapped beneath tons of rock, awaiting only the right moment to awaken. The dwarves believed they knew every tunnel, every chamber, every resonance of their subterranean kingdoms. But there was a territory where not even their courage dared to penetrate without hesitation, the oldest foundations of Khazad-dûm, where the echo always seemed a second behind, as if something enormous breathed along with the earth. Centuries passed, kingdoms rose and fell, and no one imagined that there, amidst dust and darkness, resided an entity forged before. The sun even rose. Then came the decisive moment, the point in the journey where ambition triumphs over common sense, and where seemingly simple decisions shape the future of entire nations. In 1980 of the Third Age, while searching for more mithril, the dwarves dug too deep. It was history repeating its pattern, the pursuit of power greater than necessary, the unwavering belief that nothing could stop them, the mentality of infinite expansion. And the instant their pickaxes pierced the last layer of rock, what they found was not wealth, but a presence so ancient it seemed to belong to another world. The Balrog's awakening was no subtlety. Legends speak of a roar that made the tunnels tremble like leaves in the wind, of a crimson light that tore through the darkness and turned stone to ash, and of a heat so profound it seemed to emanate from the very heart of the world. The psychological impact of that moment was as great as its destructive force. It was not merely a monster unleashed, but the return of an entire chapter of history that everyone believed to be buried. The Balrog rose like a king, reclaiming his throne, needing to conquer nothing, for everything around him already belonged to him by right. And the dwarves, for the first time in ages, felt something they rarely admit: pure fear. The colossal figure advanced through the ancient corridors like a living shadow, enveloped in fire and fury, transforming Khazad-dûm into a labyrinth of despair. The myth became reality before the eyes of Durin the Sixth, who fell before the scourge, whose wrath no mortal weapon could quell. There was born the legend of Durin's Bane, the terror that forever marked the identity of the dwarven people. The Balrog was no longer just a creature. It was proof that not all sleeping power must be awakened, and that some truths are so ancient that they defy even the logic of the ages. His reign over Moria was not built on armies, but on presence. He didn't need to march, negotiate, or shout orders. Simply existing was enough. His authority didn't come from brute force, but from inevitability, that which cannot be debated, only acknowledged. Moria became an open tomb, a silent kingdom ruled by a single eternal flame burning in its depths. And for centuries, no army dared reclaim what had been lost. Even the bravest warriors knew that facing the Balrog was walking towards a destiny sealed before the battle even began. What's most striking is realizing that behind this narrative, there's a more intimate, almost philosophical layer. The Balrog represents the ultimate consequence of the uncontrolled pursuit of more riches, more glory, more territory. He is a living reminder that some journeys are interrupted precisely when the explorer crosses the line of prudence. And that's why his story resonates so strongly. It shows that the enemy doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes he is awakened within what we believed we completely dominated. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Smaug was always more than just a feared creature in the tales that circulated around campfires and taverns. He was the very definition of excess, the extreme consequence of a mentality shaped by greed and the unwavering certainty that nothing in the world could challenge him. When the golden dragon first appeared on the horizon, Erebor still shone in its splendor, its halls overflowing with treasures accumulated over generations, its kings confident in the security of their walls and the strength of their armies. But all this glory crumbled in an instant when Smaug, like a whirlwind of fire and destruction, descended upon the lonely mountain with the precision of a predator that never misses its moment to strike. The fall of Erebor was too swift to be understood and too slow to be forgotten. It was a cruel lesson in how a single decision, ignoring the signs, underestimating the enemy, trusting too much in one's own invincibility, can change the fate of an entire people. Smaug didn't seize the mountain merely for power. He took it by right, as if the splendor of the dwarves were only a prelude to their true purpose, to serve as a throne for the last of the great dragons. He knew he dominated more than land and riches. He dominated the imagination of the people, the collective psyche, the instinctive fear that arises when someone awakens before a force that does not negotiate, does not hesitate, and recognizes no limits. Smaug's journey cannot be understood solely by the destruction he left behind, but by the silent transformation he provoked in the dynamics of Mittelerde. With Erebor under his wing, human cities began to live in constant alert. Trade routes were abandoned, and kingdoms that once prospered were forced to redirect strategic decisions that influenced generations. Smaug was such an overwhelming presence that his mere existence altered behaviors and choices, like a permanent storm looming over the north. This dragon was neither stupid nor impulsive. On the contrary, his sharp intelligence was as deadly as his flames. He relished every conversation, every provocation, every word he could use to unbalance an opponent. He was a master of psychological manipulation, capable of dismantling a warrior's courage with just a well-placed comment. He delighted in the emotional impact he caused, in the way his enemies faltered even before seeing him. And that made him all the more dangerous. Smaug sought no armies, followers, or alliances. His mentality was that of an absolute sovereign, someone who sees any form of partnership as a threat to his own majesty. He would never accept orders from another being, be it mortal, elf, wizard, or even Sauron. The world was too small for two tyrants, and this absolute independence transformed Smaug into more than just an enemy. He became an unpredictable variable, an element beyond the control of any player. Sauron, with all his cunning and mastery, over fear, understood perfectly that he could not bend the will of a dragon like him. Because Smaug was not only driven by greed, he was driven by pride, a pride so profound that it bordered on madness. Each gold coin in his immense treasure represented a form of validation, a testament to his superiority. He did not accumulate wealth merely for pleasure, but out of necessity, as if each piece reinforced his identity as the undisputed monarch. At the same time, Smaug symbolized something greater, the consequence of ancient powers that should never have been left behind. He carried the legacy of the great dragons created and corrupted by Morgoth, spirits born to destroy, spread panic, and devour entire kingdoms. His isolated existence was an open scar on the emotional geography of Mittelerde, and like the Balrog in Moria, Smaug didn't need to act constantly to dominate. His presence atop the lonely mountain was enough to unbalance kingdoms and poison hopes. What makes his story so fascinating is precisely how he fits into the background of history without ever needing to be part of alliances or conspiracies. His power was self-sufficient, his presence a reminder that some forces exist only to reign alone. And this also explains why he could never be controlled by Sauron, because the dragon represented everything that the Lord of the Rings could not tolerate: independent will, unbreakable pride, absolute dominion over his own territory. For Smaug, any attempt at submission would be seen as an insult, and an insult for him always ended in fire. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. After the fall of Numenor, when the waves swallowed the greatest human power of the Second Age, many believed that this would be the definitive end of Morgoth's most feared servant. But Sauron was never a creature who accepted the end as something absolute. While the island was destroyed and entire cities sank into the sea, his physical body crumbled, consumed by the very arrogance that led him to defy the Valar. However, the essence that moved him, that dark flame fueled by centuries of rebellion and manipulation, did not disappear. He returned as a deformed spirit, a shadow trapped in his own evil, a being who had lost everything except the will to conquer. This return was not merely a dark rebirth, it was a profound transformation in Sauron's mentality, who came to understand that his dominion would not come through brute force, but through the ability to mold fear and distort the hope of free peoples. When he finally managed to raise Barad-dûr again, his form was no longer human nor beautiful as it had been at the beginning of time. Sauron became a direct reflection of his intentions, a rigid, cruel presence shrouded in the very darkness he had always cultivated. His journey after Numenor was marked by a single purpose: to recover the One Ring, because there resided his true strength, his core, the element that made him more than a powerful spirit. It made him inevitable. This is an aspect that many ignore, but it makes all the difference in understanding why he never tried to directly control creatures like the Balrog or Smaug. Without the ring, Sauron was incomplete. He was like a king without a crown, a general without a sword, a manipulator without his main tool. The hidden truth is that by pouring a large part of his essence into the forging of the One Ring, Sauron made a decision that would define him forever. He strengthened himself and imprisoned himself at the same time. The power he achieved by creating the ring was immense, capable of bending kingdoms and corrupting even the noblest, but this conquest carried an incalculable risk. From that moment on, everything he was bound to a single object. Losing his body meant a setback. Losing the ring meant an incurable wound. And that is what happened in the Battle of the Last Alliance, when Isildur snatched the ring from his hand, destroying Sauron's physical body and undoing much of his power. He did not disappear, but fragmented, becoming less than he was, and yet more persistent than any enemy Middle-earth had ever known. In the ages that followed, Sauron existed as a weakened but tireless presence, rebuilding his army, influencing from afar, acting behind the scenes like a shadow that refused to give up. His obsession became increasingly evident. Recovering the One Ring was his absolute priority, not out of pride, but out of necessity. Without it, Sauron could not regain his full form, nor exert dominion over creatures that recognized no leadership inferior to their own. This is why he never attempted to confront or directly command the Balrog or Smaug. The Balrog was a primordial spirit of fire, a being that carried remnants of Morgoth's own flame. Smaug, in turn, was driven by such wrathful pride that no promise or threat would make a difference. Sauron knew this. Without the ring, he did not have enough strength to subdue them, and trying in his weakened state would be a fatal mistake. This perception shaped each of his strategic decisions. He learned to act indirectly, to manipulate peoples, exploit human weaknesses, distort promises, and ignite wars that would weaken his enemies without him having to expose himself. His strength lay not only in the armies he gathered in Mordor, but in the silent influence he spread throughout the world. Every divided kingdom, every ignited rivalry, every sown doubt was a way to lessen the need to directly confront creatures impossible to control. Evil, for him, functioned better as a decentralized network than as a disciplined legion. Even weakened, Sauron was still an immense threat, capable of manipulating kings, corrupting lesser wizards, and leading nations to ruin. What he lacked was not will or intelligence. It was the raw power that the One Ring provided. And this void is the central point that explains why he observed entities like Smaug and the Balrog from afar, allowing them to reign in their own territories. He deeply understood that his influence had limits, and that exceeding them would be dangerous even to himself. That is why he became a master of acting from the shadows, awaiting the perfect moment to reclaim what was part of his soul. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. When one observes the history of Middle-earth only superficially, it's tempting to imagine that all the dark forces could have united into a single, unbeatable army. After all, Sauron was powerful, the Balrog was ancient, and Smaug was devastating. But when we analyze the behind-the-scenes aspects of this narrative more carefully, exploring the mentality, the inner motivations, and the psychology of darkness, we realize that the true reason this alliance never existed wasn't a lack of opportunity, but rather the essence of each of these beings. Each shadow carried within itself an ego so inflamed, so absolute, that it would have been impossible to place them side by side without provoking an explosive reaction. The rivalry wasn't a detail, it was the foundation of the division. Sauron, even in his weakest moments, never relinquished his desire for total control. He didn't want allies, he wanted instruments. His ambition served as a beacon guiding all his decisions, and any creature that could not be manipulated, threatened, or corrupted ended up being discarded from his plans. For him, sharing power would be like admitting weakness. And admitting weakness was never part of his vocabulary. His journey always revolved around domination, imposed order, the idea that only one will should prevail over all of Middle-earth, his own. This obsession made it impossible to consider a genuine pact with someone as unpredictable as Smaug or as naturally and violently independent as the Balrog. The Balrog, for its part, did not seek to conquer kingdoms, collect treasures, or expand its influence. It wanted only one thing: to reign silently. Over the abyss it had chosen as its home. Its mentality was that of an immobile monarch, a king buried in primordial darkness whose very existence was a domain. It saw no purpose in external alliances because nothing above the surface interested it. It was like a force of nature. It does not seek, it does not follow, it does not command. It simply exists. The Balrog would not obey even Morgoth himself if it were freed without chains. Imagine then its reaction to the idea of accepting Sauron as its superior. For it, serving was an offense, a distortion of its own identity, and any approach that suggested hierarchy would have the same effect as throwing oil on incandescent magma. Smaug, on the other hand, was the perfect portrait of vanity turned to fire. If the Balrog represented the silence of the depths, Smaug represented the roar of ambition. He didn't want secrets. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to be feared. His throne wasn't just the gold of Erebor. It was the feeling of being the most powerful creature in all the North. Absolute dominion over his treasure wasn't just a preference, but a reflection of his mentality. Nothing in the world was worthy of sharing his glory. Not even Sauron. Indeed, especially Sauron. Smaug despised the idea of submission because he believed himself superior to all. And this belief wasn't an illusion. It was a deeply ingrained value system. He acted as a king not by right, but by pure conviction. When we bring these three forces together, the controller, the isolated, and the proud, we realize that we are not talking only about powerful creatures, but about egos that cancel each other out. Evil, in Tolkien's mythology, never fails for lack of strength. It fails because of excessive vanity, because of excessive hunger, because of an excess of self. It is a hidden truth that reveals something fascinating. The destruction of evil often comes from within. The inability to cooperate is not an accident. It is a natural consequence of the very essence of these creatures. They were shaped in different eras, for different functions, by different desires, and these differences could not coexist in the same purpose without generating conflict. Sauron would never accept seeing Smaug as an equal. Smaug would never accept seeing Sauron as a superior. The Balrog would never accept seeing either of them near his subterranean kingdom. And this explains why the alliance never went beyond a fantasy feared by the free peoples, because in practice it would be impossible. Evil is not a unified force. It is a collection of chaotic wills trying to compete with each other for the same imaginary crown. While the free peoples fight for survival, honor, and protection, darkness fights for supremacy, and supremacy by definition can only belong to one. This silent rivalry, this psychological game between shadows, is what prevented the total ruin of Middle-earth. The clash between pride and ambition creates cracks that could never sustain a coalition. Evil destroys itself, not because it is weak, but because it is insatiable. And it is precisely in this detail that the heart of this revelation lies. The world was saved not only by the courage of the heroes, but by the villains' inability to share the same stage. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. From the beginning, Sauron understood something that few enemies in any era could see so clearly. Not every victory needs to be won with shouts, marching armies, or explicit pacts. Sometimes, the most efficient path lies precisely in the absence of contact, in the ability to influence realities without ever being seen moving the pieces. This mentality shaped much of his journey in the Third Age, revealing a hidden truth that many ignore. Sauron was, above all, a master of indirect manipulation. He knew how to recognize limits, adapt strategies, and transform even that which he did not control into something useful for his own purposes. It is a form of intelligence so refined that it seems almost invisible to the unprepared eye. When Sauron realized he could never tame creatures like the Balrog or Smaug, not for lack of will, but due to structural impossibility, he made a decision that practically rewrote the rules of power in Middle-earth. He chose to use these forces without needing to possess them. He transformed untamable monsters into silent cogs in a much larger plan, making their devastating impacts act as natural barriers that weakened free peoples and unintentionally strengthened the advance of the shadow. This choice, so different from the traditional approach of tyrants, is what truly separates Sauron from common villains. He didn't waste energy trying to bend the impossible. He preferred to direct chaos to his advantage. The Balrog, for example, became an unwitting ally. When it awoke in Moria and destroyed the heart of the Dwarven kingdom, it created a far-reaching strategic chasm. The passes of Moria, which had previously served as an essential route for reinforcements from Khazad-dûm or for links between East and West, became dead territory. No sensible army would dare cross those shadows, and this had a direct impact. It weakened communication between elven kingdoms, limited the movement of human forces, and further isolated the free peoples, leaving them vulnerable and fragmented. Sauron didn't need to lift a finger to make this happen. The Balrog did exactly what it would do anyway: rule over the chasm, but its effects echoed in the war strategies of the entire continent. Smaug, for his part, was a walking disaster that Sauron never had any interest in confronting directly. The Golden Dragon, installed atop the lonely mountain like a tyrannical king, kept the north perpetually under pressure. His presence isolated cities, destroyed economies, prevented alliances, and kept the men of the lake and other neighboring peoples in an eternal dance between fear and survival, while Smaug slept. Upon his treasure, entire kingdoms lost the ability to strengthen themselves, and this drastically reduced the chances of organized resistance against Mordor. Once again, Sauron merely observed. He didn't need to interfere. He simply allowed Smaug's nature, greedy, volatile, and destructive, to continue its work. This invisible strategy reveals a powerful intellectual layer. Sauron deeply understood how the emotional and political structures of Middle-earth functioned. He understood that fear has a greater impact than any sword, and that decisions made under pressure shape entire destinies. Using this knowledge, he exploited every external threat as if it were part of his own army. Evil served him unknowingly, not because it was subordinate, but because its existence fit perfectly into the cracks that Sauron exploited. Indirect manipulation also allowed him to maintain a safe distance. If the Balrog decided to unleash its fury, or Smaug decided to fly over other regions, the consequences would fall upon the free peoples, never upon Mordor. This strategic distancing functioned as a psychological and military shield. While attention was focused on independent threats, Sauron's watchful eye amassed forces, rebuilt armies, and strengthened internal structures without arousing suspicion that it was all part of a well-planned game. This approach represents the essence of manipulative leadership, moving the world without the world realizing it. The most unsettling aspect of this Dynamic is realizing that even without forming alliances, the forces of darkness reinforced each other. Each isolated action of these monsters created domino effects that, in the end, benefited Sauron's advance. Evil didn't need to be united to be efficient. It only needed to be constant, unpredictable, dispersed, and, above all, self-sufficient. This is a revelation that changes how we perceive the entire Third Age. The battle wasn't fought only on the borders of Gondor or within the walls of Helm's Deep. It was spread throughout every corner of Middle-earth, through these presences that acted as satellite shadows, slowly weakening any possibility of unity among the free peoples. This strategy also shows us something else important. Sauron valued chaos more than absolute control when it served his purpose, and this differentiates his journey from any other classic tyrant. He understood that some forces only function when left free, not out of kindness, but out of calculation. After all, trying to directly control creatures like Smaug and the Balrog would be a waste of energy and an unnecessary risk. Allowing them to reign, however, was to transform independent monsters into silent weapons, weapons he didn't need to wield. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. From the very first moment, one imagines the possibility of Sauron attempting to directly control creatures like the Balrog or Smaug. An inevitable question arises. Why did he never dare to take that step? At first glance, it may seem strange that someone so ambitious would ignore such powerful forces, capable of rewriting the balance of Middle-earth in a matter of days. But when we delve into the psychology of darkness and understand the mentality of these entities, we realize that this lack of approach was not a failure, but a conscious decision, perhaps one of the most intelligent choices in Sauron's entire strategic repertoire. Each of these creatures carried within them not only overwhelming physical strength, but explosive emotions, unstable impulses, and an independence so fierce that any attempt at domination could unleash irreversible consequences. If Sauron had tried to control the Balrog, for example, he would have awakened something far more dangerous than a simple spirit of fire. The Balrog was driven by a primal sense of dominance, a visceral need to control its territory without external interference. It recognized no hierarchies beyond those it established, and any suggestion of obedience could be interpreted as an intolerable violation of its identity. Forcing it to act against its will would be like trying to put shackles on a volcano. The kind of decision that not only fails, but drags everything around it into destruction. A furious reaction from the Balrog could consume entire mountains, destroy armies, and turn Mordor into a field of ashes before Sauron could even formulate any defense. The hidden truth behind this situation is simple. You cannot control something that was born to be uncontrollable. Smaug represented an even greater risk. If the Balrog was the silent force of the abyss, Smaug was the storm in the form of fire. Proud, cunning, and unpredictable, he would not only refuse to be commanded, he would feel insulted by any attempt at manipulation. And Smaug didn't just react with destruction, he reacted with intent. His mind sharpened the details before attacking, and his wrath had direction. If Sauron tried to approach with promises, gold, or threats, the effect could be catastrophic. A single flight of Smaug towards Mordor could turn decades of planning into ruins. He knew his flame was capable of devastating cities and breaking walls, and he would never hesitate to use it to assert his superiority. The dragon accepted no chains, no alliances, no agreements. He accepted only himself, and that's the central point. Sauron understood that by trying to force obedience from these creatures, he wouldn't create allies. He would create enemies. Enemies powerful enough to swallow his fortress, decimate his orcs, and delay his plans for centuries. Monsters like these don't submit. They respond with violence. The risk was so extreme that any rash move could result not only in the physical destruction of Mordor, but also in the loss of influence, time, and strategic advantage. Sauron knew exactly the kind of creature he was dealing with, and he knew that this was one of the few paths that should not be followed. Behind the scenes of this story lies an important revelation. Evil, when pressured, does not bend, it reacts, and it reacts with intensity proportional to the threat. Trying to control the uncontrollable is like trying to lift a blade by its edge. Sooner or later you hurt yourself. Sauron knew this principle deeply. He had witnessed the fury of similar creatures during Morgoth's reign and knew that even Melkor, with all his power, could not keep his servants completely under control. The fragmentation of evil has always been a natural consequence of its own pride. That is why Sauron chose an approach that many do not understand at first glance, keeping his distance. Allowing each creature to reign in its own territory without directly interfering was more than convenience. It was strategic survival. He transformed independent monsters into natural obstacles that weakened his enemies, without taking the mortal risk of turning them into personal threats. In doing so, he avoided igniting internal conflicts that could devastate his own ranks. This type of decision, so cold and calculated, reveals that Sauron understood not only the power of shadows, but also their limits. He knew that the arrogance of trying to dominate the Balrog, or Smaug, would be interpreted not as strength, but as provocation. And provocation, in this context, was synonymous with suicide. Thus, contrary to what many imagine, Sauron's greatest enemy was never just Gondor or the Free Kingdoms. It was the very risk of awakening enemies he could never defeat. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Imagine for a moment a Mittelerde where the improbable has happened. All the shadows, all the terrors, and all the forces that should have remained separate have finally united under a single purpose. A world where the Balrog abandons the depths of Moria. Smaug takes flight over the north, with his roar setting entire skies ablaze, and Sauron guides them with the precision of a strategist, who sees the entire map as if it were a personal chessboard. It is almost impossible not to feel the emotional impact of this scenario, because it represents not only brute force, it represents the complete transformation of the balance between light and darkness. The walls of Gondor would crumble like clay, the great elven halls would lose their splendor, and even the dwarves, so resilient, would see their last refuges reduced to rubble. The idea of resistance would be crushed before it was even born. No hero, no legendary sword, no ancient alliance could withstand such a devastating trio. The combined presence of these three entities would create a calamity so vast that it would change the very structure of Middle-earth. The Balrog, with its dominion over primordial fire, would destroy entire cities with the force of a living earthquake. Smaug, with his proud fury, would burn trade routes, forests, fortresses, and human kingdoms in a matter of days, spreading panic even before attacking. And Sauron, with his obsessive, calculating mindset, would orchestrate it all with absolute coldness, choosing exactly where to strike each people to shatter their hope from within. It would be a simultaneous attack on body and spirit. The war would not only be physical, but psychological, and that is precisely the kind of war in which Sauron always excelled. When we imagine this merging of forces, we realize the magnitude of the threat. It wouldn't simply be a lost battle. It would be the end of history itself, as free peoples know it. Decisions would cease to matter because there would be no real choices to be made. The journey of entire peoples would end in a few solar cycles, and there would be no fortress deep enough, wall thick enough, or spell powerful enough that could contain three entities built to destroy. This perspective shows us how seemingly small details, rivalries, egos, differences in purpose, ultimately determine the fate of entire eras. But that's precisely where the most surprising revelation comes in. What saved Middle-earth wasn't just courage, unlikely alliances, or last-minute heroic acts. It was evil's inability to cooperate with itself. Evil, in essence, doesn't unite. It collides, disputes, consumes itself. It distrusts before trusting, devours before sharing. Sauron would never accept being on the same level as the Balrog. The Balrog would never recognize anyone as its superior. Smaug would never share glory, gold, or authority with any creature, not even for a moment. This profound incompatibility, this structural fragmentation of evil, functioned as an invisible barrier that prevented the total destruction of the world. It's curious to realize how, behind the scenes of history, the lack of unity among the forces of darkness was as decisive as the bravery of the free peoples. There's a hidden truth in this paradox. Sometimes salvation depends not only on the choices of heroes, but also on the failings of villains. The arrogance that makes evil so threatening is the same arrogance that prevents its absolute rise. And if this balance had been different, if the shadows had managed to silence their internal conflicts, nothing would have remained to tell. It is precisely this kind of reflection that makes this universe so emotionally profound, so rich in layers, and so full of symbolic meaning. And yet, a question remains echoing like an unsettling whisper. What if one day someone, in some future era, or in some forgotten corner of Middle-earth, found a way to unite such incompatible forces? What if a new dark mind emerged capable of manipulating, threatening, or seducing creatures so proud that they agreed to march under the same banner? History has already proven that nothing is impossible when ambition, fear, and power intersect. And this thought leaves a door ajar to paths that perhaps should never be explored. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. If you've made it this far, you can tell that this dive into the shadows of Middle-earth is one of those that changes the way you see every detail of the story. And honestly, it's great to have you with me on this journey, because analyzing these behind-the-scenes details, these hidden truths, and this whole web of decisions and consequences only makes sense when someone on the other side also appreciates this kind of deep exploration. So, if this content gave you something valuable, something that broadened your perspective, or sparked that good kind of curiosity, consider subscribing to the channel. This is where these conversations continue and where each new video expands this universe in a way you might not find anywhere else. Oh, and since you've actually made it to the end, leave a comment below just saying you survived the journey. Also mention where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always interesting to see how this map of voices forms around Middle-earth, almost like little lights, connected in different corners of the world. If you could also leave a like, it would help more than you can imagine. Not as an obligation, but as a natural gesture from someone who felt the connection throughout the story and wants to see this project continue to grow. And if you still have the energy to continue, there's a video over here that complements this topic. Click and stay with me there.